There was a lot of hard work that went into making mummies in ancient Egypt. Mummification was first thought of many thousands of years ago, but it wasn't common in Egypt until the Old Kingdom, around 2600–2150 BCE. It was the job of embalmers, who were holy people, to make sure that the bodies of loved ones were ready to go to the future. The ancient Egyptians mummified bodies in a very specific way that was based on myths, methods for keeping bodies fresh, and religious offerings. The body and mind were connected in a way that couldn't be separated. In order to go to the afterlife, a person had to be recognized in the underworld for final judgment. In ancient Egypt, how bodies were handled wasn't just based on religious views, though. Politics, social class, and the economy were all very important, but the client was the most important thing in the funeral business. In ancient Egypt, certain materials were used for burial, but embalmers didn't always use them the same way, and not all of them were the same. This is what it was like to work as an embalmer in Egypt. Embalmers provided multi-tiered services. In ancient Egypt, the only people who were embalmed at first were rulers and people from the top classes. But as it became more popular in Egyptian society, embalmers changed how they did their jobs and now charge differently depending on the social status of the person being buried. This was proven by a new historical find in Egypt's Saqqara necropolis. Clear socioeconomic differences between the mummies in the shaft, according to Ramadan Badri Hussein, head of the Saqqara Site Tombs project. This was shown by the discovery of an embalmer's workshop with tools and 5 mummies. It's not a new idea, though, that not all embalming was the same. Herodotus wrote about the 3 types of burial 500 years before Christ. When presented with a person, embalmers showed family members options for mummification. In this occupation, certain persons employ themselves regularly and inherit this as a craft. These, whenever a body is conveyed to them, show to those who brought it wooden models, made like reality by painting. And the best of the ways of embalming, they say, is that of him whose name I think it impiety to mention when speaking of a matter of such a kind. The second which they show is less good than this and also less expensive. And the third is the least expensive of all. Having told them about this, they inquire of them in which way they desire, their friend to be prepared. Then they, after they have agreed for a certain price, depart out of the way. Simply put, the embalmers showed the family members 3 wooden figures, with the first one thought to look like Osiris. They then asked them which figure they thought their loved one would look like when they died, and went to heaven. Embalming workshops were adjacent to burial chambers. Egyptian accounts call places where bodies were embalmed the good house. People called the workshop the pure place. Historians and researchers have long thought that embalmers worked near graveyards by setting up tents or other temporary buildings. Most likely this was done a long way from living areas so that the smell wouldn't bother other people. The workshop that archaeologists found at the Saqqara necropolis was a bit more stable than was thought before, which changes this idea. The embalmer had set up shop next to a public cemetery, which is linked to the workshop. The process took about 70 days. According to Herodotus, embalming took 70 days. He described the process after the worker had cleaned the body and removed its organs. They keep it for embalming, covered up in natron for 70 days, but for a longer time than this, it is not permitted to embalm it. And when the 70 days are past, they wash the cadaver and roll its whole body up in fine linen cut into bands, smearing these beneath with gum, which the Egyptians used generally instead of glue. This isn't quite accurate, though, because other steps had to be taken to preserve it. The time range could also be sped up according to other sources. Priest Santic's tombstone from the 6th century BCE talks about a man who spent 42 days under the hand of Anubis, lord of Tazoser. There were several ways to remove internal organs. It depended on the choice made by the person's family as to what the embalmer did. First, a hook was used to take the brain through the nose. Then, a sharp stone of Ethiopia was used to take out the organs in the body. They also took out the intestines, stomach, liver, and lungs, but left the heart because they thought it was where a person's soul and personality lay. The organs were put in jars with holes in the top. Palm wine and spices were used to clean the hole. Myrrh and cassia were then used to fill it up. and the whole was sewed back together. According to Herodotus, those who desire the middle way and wish to avoid great cost, they prepare it as follows. Having filled their syringes with the oil which is got from cedar wood, with this they forthwith fill the belly. And this they do without having either cut it open or taken out the bowels, but they inject the oil by the breach, and having stopped the drench from returning back, they keep it. Then the appointed number of days for embalming, and on the last of the days they let the cedar oil come out from the belly, which they before put in. And it has such power that it brings out with it the bowels and interior organs of the body dissolved, and the natron dissolves the flesh, so that there is left only the skin and the bones. When they have done this, they give back the cadaver at once in that condition without working upon it anymore. On the less expensive end of embalming, they cleanse out the belly with a purge, and then keep the body for embalming for 70 days. Right after that, they give it back to the bringers to take away. The organs were put into canopic jars in both of the lower-level choices, but they were given a lot less care. Water, oil, and salt were at the core of any good embalming. The steps changed over time, but the most important parts were always cleaning, drying, and refreshing the body. Nagorn was mixed with water to wash the body and ate away at the skin. The embalmers could also get sick from the process because natron is harsh on the skin, eyes, and lungs. Natron, a mineral salt that is made up of sodium carbonate and occurs naturally, was used to dry out the body. After all the innards were taken out of the torso, it was covered with natron and left alone for about 40 days. They were put on tables that were tilted so that the fluid could drain into containers that were ready. There is evidence that workers also used sodium chloride, which is also known as table salt. In the early days of mummification, bodies were also put in sand to dry on their own. When the embalmers got together for the treatment, Diodorus Siculus wrote in the 1st century BCE, one of them reaches through the cut into the thoracic cavity and removes everything except the kidneys and the heart. Something else cleans every part of the viscera by running it under sweet water and palm wine. Then, the whole body is carefully anointed, first with cedar oil and the like. Archaeologists now have oils and measuring cups. All of them are labeled. From this, we can find the chemical composition of the oils and discover what they are, thanks to the find at Saqqara. No one knows how much of these things embalmers used. Fragrances were essential to the process. For several reasons, adding frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, cassia, and other sweet woods and oils to the process of embalming was thought to make the gods happy. Still, the smells must have made the process a lot easier for the people who were getting the bodies ready. In order to give the body the odor of a god, it was important to bathe it with oil and perfume several times during the process. After the brain was taken out, a mixture of wax, scented oil, and resin was poured into the head to keep it in shape. It was part of the ritual of embalming to massage the body with juniper oil, beeswax, wine, spices, and milk before the cut in the abdomen was closed. During the opening of the mouth ceremony, when the mouth was opened again so the person could eat in the future, it was covered in oil from the shoulders to the feet. Packing the body required attention to detail. So that the bodies would be recognized in the future, embalmers had to make sure they looked like they did before they were dried out. After it had dried out enough, the natron was taken off and it was cleaned again. In some cases, workers would pick up hair, fingernails, and toes that had come off while the body was being drained. Then they filled the body spaces with sawdust, linen, and even sand to make it look like a real person. They also had woods and scented oils. It happened all the time that the embalmers stuffed the body and head too much. It got so heavy for Queen Henodwe that her cheeks burst. When her body was found, it was also out of scale, but it has since been fixed up to look more natural. There were also worries about the things that were put inside the body. Instructions warned workers to beware lest he be turned upside down onto his abdomen or his face, for his body is filled with medicinal materials, and the gods which are within his abdomen might be displaced from their position. It was also very important to make sure nothing fell out. Wrapping was done carefully, but could be outsourced to the family. Wrapping was the most expensive way to embalm someone. Herodotus says that the workers washed the body and wrapped it in strips of cloth after it had been dry for 70 days. The second and third tier bodies, on the other hand, were wrapped by their families after experts dried them out. Most of the time, linen was used to wrap things. The royal family may have been dressed in fine fabrics, but those who were sent home were likely wrapped in whole clothes or old household things. Body parts like the head and limbs were wrapped first, and they were wrapped in layers to keep the shape of the body. Mummies were also wrapped in amulets to get ready for their journey to the dead. The amulets had holy symbols carved into them and were linked to certain gods, most often Osiris. Royal mummies often had gems and valuable metals on them. After a body was fully wrapped, resin was poured over it. You could also add paint, faces, and writing. Embalming of women was delayed so men didn't corrupt the bodies. A Greek historian named Diodorus Siculus said that all Egyptian embalmers were men who inherited this profession. Because of this, there were different rules for how to embalm men and women. In his 5th century description of the process, Herodotus explained, "Wives of men of rank, when they perish, are not given at once to be embalmed, nor such women as are very beautiful or of greater regard than others, but on the 3rd or 4th day after their passing, and not before, they are delivered to the embalmers. They do so about this matter in order that the embalmers may not mistreat their women, for they say that one of them was taken once doing so to the body of a woman lately passed, and his fellow craftsmen gave information." The ancient Egyptians believed everyone deserved to be embalmed. According to Herodotus, whenever anyone, either of the Egyptians themselves or of strangers, is found to have been carried off by a crocodile or succumbed to the river itself, the people of any city by which he may have been cast up on land must embalm him and lay him out in the fairest way they can and inter him in a sacred place, nor may any of his relations or friends besides touch him. But the priests of the Nile themselves handle the body and place it as that of one who was something more than man. In other words, the town or people who found the stranger were responsible for paying for the burial. Diodorus says that the costs might not have been too much to handle. No matter what was done, the job cost 1 silver talent, 20 mines, or an entirely insignificant amount. Professionals were organized into subsets and unionized. Diodorus and Herodotus both say that burial was a family business. As the technique went up and down in popularity, so did the need for embalmers. When they were at their best, embalmers joined together to keep their trade hidden. There were different levels of workers, just like there were different levels of embalming. Supervisors, or hariseshta, who were called masters of secrets, wore dog masks and played the part of Anubis to prepare Osiris's body for the afterlife. At the right times, the Ketemu Netjer, the seal-bearer of the god, and the Keri Hebet, the keeper of the sacred book, read the right sayings, while the Wetyu got the materials ready. Later, Greek writers talked about incision makers and picklers, but there is no Egyptian writing that talks about these jobs. We hope you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.